Cześć, z tej strony Kacper Woźkowiak, Rowery.org. Witam wszystkich bardzo serdecznie i zapraszam na kolejny odcinek naszego rowerowego podcastu. Już za kilka dni w amerykańskim Fayetteville rozpoczną się przełajowe Mistrzostwa Świata. Dlatego naszym dzisiejszym gościem jest Caleb Swartz, amerykański przełajowiec i kolarz górski, ale także świetny rozmówca. Człowiek, który doskonale zna trasy oraz specyfikę ścigania za oceanem. Co prawda w zeszłym roku jego karierę przerwała pandemia, ale tej zimy jeździł na wysokim poziomie, dzięki czemu znalazł się w kadrze na Mistrzostwa Świata. Z Calebem porozmawialiśmy o różnicach między przełajami w Europie i USA, jego przygodach i podróży do Europy w obecnych pandemicznych czasach. Zapraszam do oglądania, zapraszam do słuchania tego odcinka. Hi Caleb, I'm Kacper. Thank you for taking the time for this interview. I like to talk about your career, racing in the US and current season. Is okay?
Yes, absolutely.
How do you feel after returning to the US?
I'm feeling good. I was back home in the Midwest near Chicago for a couple of days after I returned from Europe, and I took some time off the bike and rested a little bit. And it was so cold I could hardly ride outside. It was negative 15 Celsius. And now I flew down south to Arizona. So I'm in Tucson, and now I'm back to training hard to make the final preparations for the World Championships. And I'm, recovered and excited to be training again. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. How would you describe your season so far?
A lot of progress. I think one thing I've really started to focus on this season is not just, where I'm at a one moment in time, but more so my trajectory. And as a first year elite racer, I'm 22 years old, race age 23. I put together my own program, my privateer program, gathered all my own sponsors, figured out all my own logistics, drove myself to all the races. It was a big step to get to the start line, especially after not racing at all. I raced no cyclocross in 2021 or 2020 because of COVID. So I basically took 2 years off from cyclocross. Last race I'd done was Dubendorf World Championships in 2020. So there were it was very, very different way to start a season with a new team, with a new program without having raced. But then, to start actually gathering results and improving and all of that and perform well at nationals and go to Europe and do all these new things in addition to just being able to, get to the start line with this new group of sponsors and support was, a whole level of success that I set those goals to try and achieve, but did not know if they would actually happen. And they did.
Okay. How big of a challenge in terms of sporting level and logistic is going to Europe to race in this winter?
I think, the level of competition, the sporting level is incredibly high. And that was no surprise to me. I did a couple trips as a second year junior, 17-18, to Europe and did Valkenburg World Cup and Zonhoven, Namur, Zolder, as well as Hoogerheide World Cup and Luxembourg World Championships in 2017. So I knew just how hard it was as a junior. And then I went as I only went over once as an under 23 rider. I went and I only did one U23 World Cup ever, and then the World Championships in 2020. I basically went and did Hoogerheide World Cup, got 14th, went to World Championships, got 21st, and that was the extent of my entire U23 racing career in Europe. And then basically took 2 years off and then went to elites where all of a sudden I have to race Vanderpool and Wout. And I knew that was going to be a tremendous jump in level, but I was familiar with it in a way from doing the US World Cups. I knew it was going to be hard. I knew it was going to be intense, but then I knew that going to Europe was always just a totally different level up. And then in terms of logistics, it was a little tricky, but basically there was a Swiss rider who's a friend who raced all season in the US, who connected me with another mechanic from Quebec, who then works for a group called Cyclocross Customs. And basically I got connected through a friend of a friend of a friend to these guys who found a place for me to stay and could wrench for me and drive me to the races. And basically I booked a plane ticket and flew to Brussels and got picked up by some strangers, and then went to a stranger's house and stayed there for 3 weeks and had a great time and made new friends. And yeah, it was very unconventional, but it worked out great. And they were great mechanics and great to hang around. And yeah, it made it, it's just, you cannot perform in Europe without great mechanical support, in the pit before and after the race, just is essential.
And the next question, what are the differences between cyclocross in Europe and cyclocross in the USA?
Oh gosh. So I think right off the bat, one thing is that, you don't pay for entry fees in Europe. In the US, it's $60 US dollars or $50 to $65 a day of racing. So that's very different. In the US, the pro riders are part of the way the promoters make money too. So they're trying to make money off us as well as the other amateur racers. And that's another big difference, is that all the UCI races also have amateur racing throughout the day, from young juniors all the way up to masters riders. So that's a very different model. It's not just the pros, it's everybody who races, and then all those people who race stick around and cheer for the pro riders. But I think in terms of money, it's definitely a different model in Europe, because the promoters are not charging us for parking, and they're not charging us hundreds of dollars in entry fees. I mean, it's almost cheaper in that regard to come race in Europe, because there's not really any start bonus money in the US. So in Europe, you can not have to pay for your parking, not have to pay for your race entry fees. You can actually be paid to start. You'll win more prize money. So that's very different in terms of just the structure. But then, the reason that model is different for a lot of reasons, a big reason of that is we don't have the fans like they do in Europe. We don't have thousands and thousands of people coming to watch these races. So there aren't people buying tickets, and there aren't people buying, frites and beer. So the race promoters are not making money off of, having 20,000 fans come to Leeuwenhout on Boxing Day, So that's very different. And then I think there's just a lot more in terms of courses and conditions. There's a lot more mud in Europe. In the US, we only really have mud if it's raining heavily. Other than that, it's pretty dry and fast. So we get a lot of very fast, dusty races, especially early season. Whereas in Europe, it's just usually slick at least, never really bone dry. And a lot of times full on mud. So I think that's a lot of times in the US, I'll basically run a file tread, a challenge chicane, or a full challenge limus, and I don't think I've raced my Grifos in the US this whole year. Whereas in Europe, there's probably 3 races where racing an intermediate tire was the right choice, because it wasn't really slick, but it wasn't really dry. And then I think, again, in terms of courses, there's a lot more running in a lot of European races. There's different features as well. Like in the US, we never really have ditch crossings, like ditch jumps and stuff, like Leeuwenhout has. I think Namur, it's just a different level of course in general. There's nothing that difficult or challenging technically in the US at all, for the most part. I mean, there's very few. I don't think I've done a race this year in the US where I was, afraid of a feature or worried I could get hurt. Whereas like on Namur, you're like, there's 3 or 4 sections a lap where you could, basically if you crash there, you might not finish that race. So that's definitely different too, is just the pure level of skill required to ride some of these courses, which I love. Just riding them is one thing, and then being able to ride them at the level of those professionals, the top guys, is another story entirely. Like Toon and Wout and everybody else, they just are so smooth and so fast. It's incredible.
Okay, you talk about the course. What is your favorite type of cyclocross route in Europe and in the USA?
Ooh, like which course specifically, or which type of course?
Which course?
Okay. I think in this past trip that I did, I really liked the Hulst course. That one was really fun. Of the races I did, the Hulst World Cup was probably one of my favorites. Lots of drops, lots of off cambers, big run-ups. It was very scenic with the windmill and everything else. And I think in the mud, that course would have been just crazy because those drops were super massive and intense and fast. And the run-ups were really tricky. And then there were so many off cambers. I think if that course was, a full-on mud race, it would be one of the most challenging courses anybody has ever done. But then I think Namur is also really cool. And then personally, I sometimes, a lot of times I will bias courses where I perform better, even if it's not the most exciting course. So like, I like Dendermonde World Cup too, because I like the running. It's not the most exciting course, but it was cool. It required a lot of different skills. You had to be good at riding mud. You had to be good at off cameras. You had to be good at stairs. You had to be good at running. You had to be okay at sand. And also have power. So I like the courses that demand a very diverse skill set, because you can't hide. You can't get away with anything. I think probably my favorite course in the U.S. this year was our national championship course in Chicago. Similar thing, it had power sections, it had sand, it had flat running, it had run-ups, it had stair runs, it had off cambers, it had descents, it had climbing on the bike, it had every type of skill required except for basically, snow riding, snow and ice. Although actually there was a little ice because some sections were frozen. So you couldn't be just a very skilled rider. You couldn't be just a very strong rider. You had to be extremely fit, also able to run, and also able to ride all types of features. And if you look at the results, you see that the most balanced riders perform the best, and that some of the strongest guys who can't ride as well were not where they might have normally been. And likewise with some of the most skilled riders who aren't as fit, they couldn't perform that well either because they didn't have the fitness. So in terms of courses that are both very fun and also challenging and also require a high level of skill, that was probably my favorite this year. Just because you couldn't get away with anything, nobody could hide, and nobody was where they didn't belong. That's what I liked about it.
Okay, what do you think about the U.S. course from World Cup, Fayetteville, Waterloo, and Iowa?
Yeah, I'll start with Waterloo. So I actually grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, 25 minutes from Waterloo. That's where I lived for the first 20 years of my life. So I started racing that course maybe 2013 or 14. And then that was my first World Cup I ever did, Elite World Cup I ever did back in 2019. So for me, that was very cool to go race the World Cup 6 or 7 years later, after being, a young junior rider. And that course in Waterloo is really fun. That's, those drops and other sections are very challenging. Some of the run-ups are really challenging, but then also a lot of power sections. I like that course better in the full mud. It's more interesting, and those off cameras are really tricky. And this year it was bizarre. We started on dry tires, and then it started raining, but the course was kind of packed in. So instead of turning to real mud, it just became very slippery. So everybody was crashing a lot, and I crashed a bunch because we were caught off guard. All of a sudden it was mud, and I was on file treads, and I broke a shoe and dropped my chain, and it was a mess. But then Fayetteville World Cup was the first time I'd ever done that cyclocross race. There's also a series of UCI mountain bike races there that were last April. So I had done two mountain bike cross country races there and 2 short track races there. So I was actually fairly familiar with the area, and the sections of the cross race were similar to the short track. The climb and the descent and the climb I'd done tons of times, so that was fun. And I think I was glad it was muddy. That definitely made it more exciting. I think it would have been a very, very fast, not as interesting race in the dry conditions. Yeah, it was very different to see a course that was literally built for cyclocross. Normally in the US and Europe, you have the features, you have a park, whatever, and then they come and build a course with what they have. Whereas with this, they came in and built what they wanted to have for the race. So they built the stairs and the drop and these other sections, which was very unique. And it was definitely different. It was definitely different from anything we'd seen because it was so purpose-built. But I think it was a pretty good balance of descending and climbing, one or two, that one big run up, a good mixture of some off cameras. That was good. Overall, a pretty balanced course. Yeah, you definitely couldn't hide there either. You had to be good at the mud. You had to be able to climb and have to be fit, and definitely fairly good technically, even if it wasn't the most challenging race, I think. And I do not know what they will be changing for the World Championships. I'm sure they received feedback from riders and racers and other people. So I bet they will have improved it a bunch, and I'm excited to see what they do. Then lastly, Cyclocross, or Iowa City World Cup. I started doing that race in, I think, 2009 or 2010 when I was 10 years old or something. I started as a junior there back when it used to be in December, so we used to race in the snow and the ice. So it was very cool to come back 10 years later after doing that race for 10 years and finally race the World Cup there. It was very special to me. And then it was very dry this year. I like Cyclocross in the mud better. It's way more challenging, way more fun. I love the mud. So it was very, very fast this year, which was not quite what I was hoping for. But that course is definitely one of the most physically challenging races in the U.S. in terms of the running and the climbing, because there's so much elevation gain. And then, yeah, especially when it is muddy, you're climbing and running even longer, especially when the big run up this year was rideable because it was dry, whereas in other years you have to run it, and it's called Mount Crumpet. It's a ski hill, or so it's a couple hundred, 100 or 200, 150 meters high, and you basically run halfway up, straight up a ski hill, and then you turn around, descend, and then you climb to the top of the ski hill on the bike. So yeah, that course has always been one of my favorites, especially when it's muddy. It's just so fun, and so much history behind it for me and other racers,
Okay. How easy is it to get into cyclocross in the US? Hey.
I think it's pretty readily available. There's a lot of local racing. So I think it definitely takes, you definitely have to know somebody or have a parent or a friend who knows what the sport is. I think if you didn't know what cyclocross is, it'd be very hard to ever get into it. Not in the way that Americans go to school and they play football and they play soccer or they play basketball. You would never go to elementary school or the young schooling and just be put on a cyclocross bike. Unfortunately, that's not how it works here. It's not that mainstream of a sport. But for people who know about it, there's a lot of junior development programs, especially for younger riders, and a lot of excitement among parents and a lot of people who are leading races and putting on, clinics to teach kids. And there's a lot of opportunities to race other young juniors. So I think in terms of that, once you're introduced to the sport, there's a lot of opportunity to race. I think it definitely becomes trickier as you get older and older. There's not many opportunities. Similarly in Europe, it's very hard to get contracts and become a professional. It's definitely tough to develop from a 17, 18-year-old rider into the U23 field, and then especially once you're in the U23s, it's extremely difficult to go on through 4 years of U23 racing and move on to the elite field. And we've seen a lot of great riders not make it through that period of time. But many very talented U.S. riders, some of the best we've seen, just couldn't do it. But that's part of the sport, and it's definitely. I think it's still. I think the sport is still growing in the U.S., which is good.
And what do you think? How important for the discipline is having the World Championship in the USA?
Important for the Americans or important for the cyclocross in general?
For USA and general.
Yeah, I think for the Americans, when it was first here in 2013, I'm actually wearing that shirt right now, like wearing my 2013 World Championship shirt.
Oh, nice.
I think the first time it was here, it was just incredible. Like, that was the first time I'd ever been out of Europe. I went and watched it. I was 14 years old. I went and watched, or I was 13, and I went and watched in Louisville. And, that was the biggest race I'd ever been to. There's tens of thousands of people. I watched Sven win. And I hardly knew who any of those people were. But it was incredible for the Americans and the young Americans to watch that level of performance and competition at home. And I think for the racers especially, and for me especially, it's incredibly significant to have this race on home soil. It happens once a decade. I mean, the last time was 9 years ago. So to have this opportunity to, represent our sponsors on our home soil, so close to home, and even be able to have all these sponsors come to the race, and then more importantly, all the American fans, all the American cyclocross racers, all our friends and family, everybody can come watch all of their favorite riders and their kids, and my parents will come, my friends will come, everybody will be there, and to watch us be able to race at the highest level possible is just so huge, and definitely it's a very meaningful thing to be able to race and represent the U.S. at any world championship, especially for me as a first-year elite rider. But to be able to do it at home on U.S. soil is huge, and I'm incredibly excited. And I think in terms of the broad, the grand scheme of things for cyclocross, I think it's important to have, the World Championships break out of Europe. I think there are a lot of other countries that race cyclocross that don't get a lot of attention. I mean, the U.S. has become more important as we've had more World Cups and things, because there was a time when we had no World Cups, and I think it's become significant that we, especially for the racers, to have these opportunities and everything. And we've all been going to Europe for decades. In January, we all have to fly over there and make the trip, and it's hard, and we know it's hard, and there's jet lag and all this other stuff. So I think it's fair that once every 10 years, the Europeans come and do it too, because we always do it. And yeah, like, it's not easy, it's not cheap. And one thing I was noticing was when some of the European federations were publishing their rosters for the World Championships and stuff, like Switzerland was sending a small team, and like
Netherlands also have small teams.
Yeah, and it's because there's budgets. It's expensive, and that's been the U.S.'s reality for the past 20 years of development. Like, why do people think the U.S. doesn't send 6 or 7 riders for every category and have 30 people over there, 35 people? It's because it's hard. It's not, I'm not saying it's good that those European countries can't send full teams. I'm just saying that's been our reality too, is like, it's really hard to send 38 riders to Europe, or vice versa for the European countries to send 38 full riders to the US. It's very difficult with logistics and cost and everything else. So yeah, it's not easy to do. And I think more importantly as well, like, having the World Championships out of Europe helps grow the opportunity for it to be held in places besides Belgium and the Netherlands. It's been in Luxembourg, it's been Switzerland, but I mean, I don't know, has it ever been in Britain or something? Like, where else could it be? What other places that race cyclocross have never had a World Championship in their country? I think that's it sets a precedent to expand the sport outside of Belgium and the Netherlands. There's people race cyclocross in Sweden and Norway and Denmark. I guess that they were in Denmark the other year, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see where else it can go.
Okay. I took note of your activity on social media. How did you get into vlogging?
Into what?
Into vlogging.
Oh, vlogging. I kind of started as a joke in like 2019 with some friends on my mountain bike team at the time, because we were actually going to Europe to race Val di Sole World Cup and Lenzerheide World Cup. And I didn't take it very seriously. I kind of did it for fun. I still just do it with my iPhone and like edit it on my phone. I keep it pretty low key. But yeah, I started doing it as a joke, and it was very not serious, not very in depth, just kind of fun, silly antics and the dumb stuff we did, while also showing, this is what it takes to race the U23 World Cup. And people were way more interested in it than I thought they would be. And I haven't done it lately, but I also write race reports for my website and stuff. And people are definitely more interested in the video. The video content definitely creates more of a connection with people. It has more of an impact. People always, say, I really like your vlogs or this. Nobody ever says, hey, I really like that article you wrote. It's always the video, because I think that helps create more of a connection, and it enables people to get to know me more. And I feel like when people get to know a rider more, that creates that connection, that relationship. People are more invested, more interested when they can see who a rider really is, and have that they want to support that person when they know them more. And then I think as it became more of a useful tool to showcase what I do and my sponsors, and be able to give people an inside look at what it takes to race UCI mountain bike races and Cyclocross World Cups and everything else, because not very many people get to do that, and a lot of people don't understand like all of the little things I do that, you know, all add up to be able to perform at the highest level possible. You know, what is the physically, what am I doing for training, and what am I eating, and what am I doing to be mentally ready and prepared to go do this. So it's, yeah, it just became a more useful tool than I ever thought it would be. I think it's also evolved with social media in the past 2-3 years, because I think in the past 2-3 years, social media has become more important for sponsorship and more emphasized. And I think I kind of got in on the vlogging thing before it really became even as important as it is now, maybe.
Dziękuję za uwagę. Wywiad prowadził Kacper Łośkowiak. Mam nadzieję, że rozmowa była dla Was interesująca, że spodobały Wam się wątki, które poruszyliśmy w trakcie tej naszej bardzo długiej konwersacji. Dziękuję. Cześć.